Hi everyone. Sorry I can't be there today, but I'm attending the State Faculty Curriculum Committee and trying to get some courses for CMC approved. So here's my project, and this project correlates to my dissertation, which I just completed at the University of Denver, where I explored the academic self-efficacy of paramedic students in a hybrid learning program. So the problem is that nationally the need for paramedics is increasing. Colorado is even further challenged to address this need because we're more geographically challenged by distance. And although the need exists in some areas, it may not in others. So, for example, in Rifle, there may be one or two students who want to be a paramedic, and or in Delta, there may be one or two students, but that's still not enough to fill a classroom. Western Colorado specifically has these issues. So many schools have turned to online or hybrid education to train, recruit, and educate these type of students. Hybrid education specifically is increasing due to the flexibility for students who may have to travel in inclement weather, like we all did yesterday, and it also can provide a better use of resources for institutions to consider. So, although paramedic and EMS training is innately hands on and physical, we developed CMC, being we, a hybrid instructional paramedic program. This prompted me to consider or to investigate if this was a good solution. In other words, is hybrid learning sufficient in its scope to continue to effectively meet student needs in paramedic education? So as we continue to grow these type of programs, we need to understand if they're actually indeed working. So I set out to understand or answer, excuse me, two questions. And I coined a phrase which I call SASE, which is student academic self-efficacy. And I was trying to understand the relationship of academic self-efficacy and learning in a paramedic hybrid learning program, and how student academic self-efficacy affects program satisfaction. So are students satisfied and are they learning, basically? So, to get to where I needed to go, I developed my theoretical framework. And because I was using self-efficacy efficacy theory, it's really important to understand where it hails from. And um, and that is social cognitive theory. Albert Bandura is the one who coined social cognitive theory many, many years ago. He investigated it as social learning and developed this theory. Today, social cognitive theory is one of the most influential theories of human learning and development. So it's something we should pay attention to as educators. Social cognitive theory is premised on the notion that we learn by observing and reflecting on the behaviors of role models and is often applied as a theoretical framework in educational settings. So, what drew me to it is one of the key constructs of social cognitive theory that is relevant to learning as a behavior mechanism is self efficacy. And Bandura argued it was one of the critical elements. And its self efficacy, for purposes of this, is defined as a form of self evaluation, which it determines how people think, feel, motivate themselves, and behave, and actually provides an excellent framework for identifying learners' judgments about their abilities to meet their educational goals. And it's also linked to academic achievement. So my conceptual framework, this just kind of gives you like a graphic to see the direction I took and how I synthesized the different concepts of my theory. My dissertation was framed around a utilization focused evaluation. This type of evaluation is where you actually really do a narrow scope and look specifically at what's working well, and also make recommendations so that the stakeholders will actually use these recommendations. So that was, and then so conceptually, obviously, I stuck to self efficacy And then again, my phrase of, or my student academic self-efficacy, hybrid learning and self-efficacy, and how all these things tie together. Allied Health has been using hybrid learning for many years. However, paramedic education has never really adopted hybrid education as a form of learning. So the findings that I pursued, or that I discovered, excuse me, allowed me to explain if the hybrid model was successful or is successful, and to identify the relationship between student academic self-efficacy and learning. So this is just a snapshot of how I collected my data. I did use a questionnaire, which was qualitative in nature, and I also interviewed some past graduates to further the discussion from the responses to the questionnaire that I got. I did get a 58% response rate from the past graduates that I sent the survey to, or the questionnaire. And then I also interviewed an 8-member focus group who were on the advisory committee for the paramedic program to really drill down and see, what their thoughts were, and then tie that back into my research. So what it showed was I came up with 4 key findings. And these key findings were interesting in that because again, I was looking at hybrid learning specifically, but they also mirrored a lot of what online learning also espouses. So the 4 elements were learning environment, self-reliance, faculty and program facilitator preparedness, and finally, prior knowledge. So I'll talk a little bit about each one individually. So the reason why the learning environment really stood out was data suggested that having the choice and ability to learn remotely had a significant impact on students' well-being, which indirectly and directly affected their self-efficacy. There were several sub-findings, and because since a familiarity with online learning may affect this relationship with student academic self-efficacy and academic performance, students who are not familiar with online learning may not achieve high enough academic support. So it's important that confidence with technology really stood out. Another was satisfaction with the hybrid structure or the hybrid curriculum. So how the instructor actually laid out the curriculum when they were doing asynchronous and synchronous really affected students' self-efficacy. Like, did they feel confident when they felt like they were getting the material that they needed? And then also communication within a hybrid environment. As you can see here, I'm just doing a recording, but if you wanted to ask me a question, you'd actually have to email me because there's really no two-way set of communication. Sometimes the instructor would use WebEx, but again, when you're competing against 8 other people who are beeping in and out, sometimes that can also prove to be frustrating, and students felt like they couldn't get answers to questions when they needed them. And at that moment, when it's the crux of trying to make that understanding. My other finding was self-reliance. This was another theme that emerged. And so for the purpose of this study, I defined self-reliance as having the ability, knowledge, and motivation to complete tasks in a hybrid learning environment. It's how students like knowing and trusting themselves and their ability. So this is an extension, or by extension, this aspect of self-efficacy helps bolster students' confidence so they can be successful and persist in academic tasks. So how confident are they, just personally? And then also, a lot of these students had to rely on themselves for how they use the technology. So there was a lot of obstacles that the data revealed in this realm. including logging on, accessing course materials, and communicating with the instructor and engagement. Another finding I had was faculty and program facilitator preparedness. There were several things which stood out, including how much they interacted, if they were organized, their experience with technology, and their knowledge of course material, which makes sense because all this affected how students learned in the hybrid environment, as well as how satisfied they were in the program and their overall confidence. So again, I just mentioned all these, but interaction, organization, use of technology, knowledge of course material, and clinical coordination. Because clinical coordination is kind of an outlier. It is really specific to allied health because students have to go into clinics and learn. So this is more narrow, or this is a more of a narrow focus as far as paramedics, nurses, medical assistants. And then finally, my last finding was prior knowledge. So because many of the students actually had some prior participation, whether it be in EMS or they were volunteering on an ambulance, and they also had some prior experience with technology, these students were more confident. They also struggled less and performed better than students who actually had absolutely no experience. So, my recommendations as a part of my dissertation was a few things, but I kind of was more than just this. I actually had 9, but I kind of narrowed it for this presentation. But intentional instructional practices was probably my #1 recommendation in a hybrid learning format. Actually promoting resilience in students so that they contain or feel like they have more self-efficacy, so they perform better and persist. And then also finally was improving the clinical coordination of the program of itself. So what are we doing? What we're doing right now is I'm working currently with the Online Learning Council and to hopefully start to develop a hybrid learning toolkit, which is misspelled here, so I apologize. But the hybrid toolkit is something where we can help students and ensure that they have prior experience with online learning, identify their motivation and their persistence. Are they comfortable with technology? Show them some time management tools or give them time management tools. And then what are their study habits? And then how they should be able to communicate. And these are all things that CMC is going to be working on currently with TEL. And because CMC is upgrading to a new SharePoint. And so things are going to look significantly different. So this is going to be hopefully coming in the year 2020 and 2021. What we're currently doing as part of the Online Learning Council is we're helping the paramedic program really develop their asynchronous and synchronous courses and how this looks and how students interact with them. CMC has also really identified how hybrid courses should be, like what is the percentage of online synchronous and percentage online face-to-face. And so instructors are also getting more tools to learn how to teach in those modalities through TEL, which is Chris Wanger's department. And so really, I think that the cost of implementing is nil because we're already implementing it. The cost of maintaining is going to be the cost of making sure that TEL supported faculty are reaching their goals as far as like professional development. And so it also won't require a vote, but it will require support from the VPAA faculty and TEL. And the timeline, finally, is that it's actually currently in progress. And several of these recommendations are being used. So here's my references. And again, thank you so much, everyone. Sorry I couldn't be there. And if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me. Have a great day and welcome to Lyft.